Yeah, please grab a drink, take a seat, make yourself comfortable. Okay, we have almost everyone seated. Almost. Okay, we're going to kick off now. Well, good afternoon and welcome. I'm Charles Keedon, the Executive Editor of Alliance Magazine. I'm delighted to extend a warm welcome to those of you joining us here in the beautiful surroundings of the Aga Khan Foundation in London, as well as hundreds, I'm told there are over 700 people registered, of philanthropy practitioners worldwide tuning in via the live stream for our 2024 Year in Philanthropy event. Really warm welcome to all of you. It's nice to see many familiar faces as well as quite a few new ones as well. This year we're focusing on philanthropy's contributions to addressing climate change. The climate crisis, as I'm sure you're all aware, is deepening, but so, as many of you will be aware, is philanthropy's response. We in our field have a growing presence on the international stage, more focus on the needs of the global south, including adaptation and resilience to pressures caused by climate change, more assertive leadership from philanthropy, we're hearing a bit more about that soon, and more available funding. Not enough, but more perhaps than there was. And as Alliance itself marks the midway point of its Climate Philanthropy 2030 initiative, and that, for those who don't know, is an initiative that commits us at Alliance Magazine to weekly coverage of climate change until the end of the decade. We thought now is a good moment to reflect on the year in climate philanthropy and hear perspectives on what should be done to address the climate crisis in 2025 and beyond. But before we start the panel, and I introduce them, I want to first thank our hosts, the Aga Khan Foundation. They have been long-standing friends and colleagues in hosting us in their wonderful offices, and also today's sponsor, Optimi. And both Aga Khan and Optimi representatives will just say a few words now, just to orient you to here. So, welcome.
So good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Aga Khan Centre. My name is Aliza Mita. I'm the Deputy Regional Director for Partnerships here at Aga Khan Foundation UK. It's a pleasure for us to be hosting this meeting in participation with Alliance, and it's great to see so many of you here today for this important and timely discussion. The Aga Khan Centre was created as a place for education, knowledge, cultural exchange, and as a space to discuss some of the key issues shaping the world today. And climate change is certainly one of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time, and one that requires everyone to play their part if we are to address it meaningfully and sustainably. As Prince Rahim Aga Khan noted at the launch of the Earthshot Prize in October 2020, it is our collective responsibility to be good stewards of the planet. At this critical moment, we must all nurture and invest in solutions that can repair our planet before it's too late. Guided by these notions of collective responsibility and stewardship, the Aga Khan Foundation and the wider Aga Khan Development Network has committed to becoming net zero across all operations by 2030 and has made environmental protection and climate resilience a core strategic priority in and of itself, as well as a cross-cutting theme for all programming and investments. These efforts are guided by 4 key principles. 1. Responsible stewardship of the environment, ensuring that the Earth can sustainably support future generations. 2. Focusing on improving the quality of life and well-being of the poorest and most vulnerable in geographies of strategic importance. 3. Demonstrating proactive, socially responsible and values-oriented leadership on the most urgent civilization and even existential issues of our time. And 4. Leading by example, sharing our experiences with others to influence policy, raise awareness, and increase impact and effect social transformation. For over 50 years, the Aga Khan Foundation has been helping some of the world's poorest and most marginalized communities to confront social, political, and economic challenges in extremely remote and difficult contexts. We have always worked with communities to adapt to changing environmental conditions, but today, these challenges are greater than ever before, threatening to undermine everything that we have accomplished together. Therefore, AKF is significantly accelerating its response to the global climate crisis, using our strong platform of community engagement and expertise in nature to strengthen communities' resilience to climate change so that they not only survive, but thrive. To achieve this, we are adopting a comprehensive and holistic approach that balances immediate needs with long-term strategies. AKF is concentrating on 5 key building blocks of climate-resilient communities. These are food systems, livelihoods, services, natural resources, and people. Every year, AKF, along with the other agencies of the Aga Khan Development Network, is planting over 10 million trees, improving food security for over 8 million people through the adoption of regenerative farming practices, providing access to clean energy for over 10 million homes, ensuring safe water and sanitation for 1.3 million people, educating over 2 million children with a focus on developing the next generation of climate leaders, and creating over 10,000 jobs with an emphasis on the green economy. We are working across diverse landscapes, including mountains, coasts, plains, and urban areas, in partnership with 23,000 community organisations who are at the front lines of the climate crisis. We are also actively addressing the reality that the climate crisis has gendered impacts, and therefore ensuring that women's empowerment and agency are at the heart of our adaptation strategies, with specific gender-focused interventions in agriculture, energy, natural resource management, and enterprise development. In other words, every aspect of AKF's work is now being harnessed and transformed to build resilient communities that can not only adapt to a changing climate, but seize new opportunities to improve their overall quality of life and prospects for a brighter future. Whilst we are ambitious and already delivering scalable solutions that are impacting millions of people, we know there is much more to do, and our actions alone are not enough. We must work closely with partners from across government, the private sector, philanthropy, and academia if we are to ensure that support is directed where it's needed most, at the speed required, and achieve the level of systemic change that is called for in order to promote a more equitable and sustainable future for people and planet. So today's event is a great opportunity for us, as like-minded organisations, to convene and critically assess how we as a group can most effectively leverage our respective and collective expertise and strengths, where our efforts can have the most impact, and where our voice and convening power can be best utilised in support of underrepresented issues or needs. I very much look forward to the discussions, and I'm sure that we have a very interesting and thought-provoking afternoon ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much again to the Aga Khan Foundation. Certainly that critical assessment will form part of this afternoon's proceedings. I'd like to just introduce Optimi, our sponsors, to say thank you to them, and they're going to say a few words as well of welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christoph, working for the company Optimi, and I will keep it very short. We'd like to thank the Alliance for this great event and organizing it, and to have the opportunity to partner up with you. And also thank you, Aga Khan Foundation, for this great venue. Who is Optimi? In one or two words, as you can hear from my accent, we are a Brussels-based grant management system, so we help organizations like you to make the world a better place by providing you with a system to work more efficiently and to get some support for impact measurement. And that's it. In case you're interested, we are here, but I will leave the floor to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Short and sweet, but there's colleagues from Optimi in the room, so you can chat to them during the course of the afternoon. So down to the business of the panel, which is for everyone both here and in the live stream joining, going to focus in on some key topics in climate philanthropy. But to get us started, we have, and those of you who were here last year, remember we did a poll to get you in the mood, thinking about the topic. We've got some poll questions that my colleague Anne-Marie is just going to bring up. If you can either use the QR code on the screen or the link in the chat if you're joining on the live stream. We've got just a few questions for you. The first is, and this is just top of mind responses, What is philanthropy getting right when it comes to tackling climate change? We don't want to be too cynical. We know there's progress being made. And we want to ask you just briefly, in one word or phrase, what philanthropy is getting right.
I think you're on a different question.
We are. We went from back to front. First question first. There we go.
Sorry, is there one?
Yeah.
Phone service is not very good.
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi's on the leaflets on the table.
If you've got the leaflet on the table, you'll see some Wi-Fi. We'll give you a little bit more time to complete this one, given that we have to get onto the Wi-Fi to get access to the internet. Some of you. Other responses coming in from the live stream as well. So, coming in from the live stream in a moment, I'll start reading them out. What's philanthropy doing right? Awareness, one. And feel free to think of some concrete things that it's achieved as well as the more intangible things. Field building, talk about that in a bit. Money, bringing more money to the table, but is it enough relative to the scale of the problems? Advocacy, flexibility, something that philanthropy arguably has more than others. Does it use it always as well as it could? Funding activism, networks, adaptation. Great. Taking risk, or does it? Adaption finance, advocacy and awareness coming out really strongly. Local responses, coalitions, efficient reporting, pooled funds, bright minds, certainly some of them in our field, intersectionality. So those are just a cross-section of top of my responses. And moving on to the second slide, and thank you for all your responses there. Where is philanthropy falling short on responding to climate change? So not necessarily where it's failed, but where it can do better, where there's room for improvement. Just get the top of my responses there. I'll read them out. So lack of core funding, not just for climate, some might add. Over-politicisation, need for more urgency, need for more scale. Listening to women and girls, a theme that we just heard from our friends at the Aga Khan Foundation a moment ago. Groupthink, too much groupthink. And the two issues really coming out there, scale and core funding. And it's great to have these kind of top of mind responses to get not just you, but our panelists thinking about what's on your mind here. So thank you for those. Question 3. If you had to choose one, and I'm conscious in life there aren't generally binary choices, but if you had to choose one, do you think philanthropy should prioritise funding technological solutions tackling climate change, or 2, funding social movements pressing for change through the political system? So 1, funding technological and technology-based solutions to tackling climate change, versus 2, funding social movements pressing for change through the political system. Please vote. Now, we are a publication that has a readership across the field of global philanthropy, but I can't claim that these responses are an accurate representation of philanthropy globally, just the people tuning in here. But out of the people tuning in here in the live stream, 80% of you who have responded are saying funding social movements should be more of a priority than funding technological solutions. The reason that's interesting, and this might be something you'll pick up on, is if you actually look at where the funding is going, I think you'll find there's more for technology than the social movements. So interesting if there's a disjunct there. And I just have one bonus question, which is going to test your knowledge of philanthropy. Bonus question. Can you name 5 philanthropy prizes or awards focused on climate change? Either the foundation that runs them or the name of the prize, anything. Impressive. Michael, you're not allowed to answer this one. And you're not, it's good. So, the most well-known seems to be the Earthshot Prize, Gulbenkian's Award, the Audacious Project, Ashton Awards, climate breakthrough, MacArthur. So yeah, that's quite good spread there. So we have got 4 or 5 up there, but by far the best, most well known as the Earthshot Prize based on what's here. Well, thank you all very much for your responses. I hope that's got you thinking about some of the topics we'll talk about today. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for pulling them up. So, with all that in mind, and thank you for your answers, again, we are now going to have a structured discussion around a list of topics that we've drawn up to think about the year in climate philanthropy, and we'll leave half the time for questions and discussion. We really want to have views from all of you here and beyond that are tuning in. So please come ready to engage directly with the panel and one another. And the panel. So Sonia Medina, on my right, is the Executive Director for Climate and the Chief Ecosystem Development Officer at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, one of the largest and most consequential foundations globally, especially when it comes to climate change. And we'll be hearing a bit more about Sonia's work. Next to Sonia is Michael Kavate, the climate philanthropy reporter, writing some of the most incisive commentary about climate philanthropy anywhere, and he's from Inside Philanthropy, California-based outfit, but Michael himself is in Barcelona. And then Megan Clay over there, to my right, who is the accountable finance lead at ClientEarth, an important NGO that's been pursuing legal actions and other challenges to push forward the agenda to tackle climate change. So welcome to all of you. If we can start with you, Sonia, we're going to just put this question to each of you, looking at climate philanthropy's growing role on the international stage. Children's Investment Fund Foundation has played a significant role at COP and at UNGA. And that's a change, right, from the past in terms of philanthropy's growing visibility. How's that worked in your organisation, and what have you been able to achieve through that?
Yeah, thank you so much. And first, thank you so much for convening us today and these important conversations. And I think at the end of the year, it's so important to take a stock and reflect a bit what we're doing well and where we could do better. And I love the question, so insightful. I think it's been a change recently over the last few years where climate philanthropy in particular has found more of a voice and more of a need for us to step up and to really provide the voice to many organizations in our community that otherwise wouldn't have a venue to actually being heard. So I take our responsibility and our time and the power that we do have to be heard to actually be a channel for many of the voiceless and that represent of our grantees. We can ensure that in UNGA or COP or other international fora, at the G20 we've also been present, at the BRIC Summit, at the spring meetings are all important opportunities to continue to have a drumbeat of activity where the agenda remains more common. But just to give some examples, I think it hasn't quite come up on the short survey. But I think highlighting the importance of youth engagement in this international forum is something that is really critical. Young people are disproportionately affected, as we know, by the climate crisis, yet remain largely without a voice on this forum. From our community, from the philanthropic community on climate, less than 1% of funding is going to youth groups. It's extremely small, so clearly they cannot fund themselves to go there. They cannot find themselves. So for the first time in COP27, we funded CIF with UNICEF and others, the first ever children and youth pavilion. And that has continued. That has grown to now have the Youth Climate Champion appointed and embedded into the UNFCCC structure, and a Youth Negotiators Academy. And I think that then will translate into a lot of the text and a lot of the negotiations to start representing youth priorities. That has been achieved through philanthropy.
And can I ask you, do you think it's making enough of a difference? So I'm just going to pull up highlight a well-known young person, Greta Thunberg. She said about the most recent COP29, the people in power are yet again about to agree, this was on the eve of the summit agreement, to a death sentence to the countless people whose lives have been or will be ruined by the climate crisis. The current text is full of false solutions and empty promises. The money from the global North countries needed to pay back their climate debt is still nowhere to be seen. The host country, Azerbaijan, is a repressive and authoritarian petrostate. Civil society at COP29 are being silenced, yet continue fighting and pushing negotiators towards the bare minimum. So do you recognise that contribution, or are there other young people's voices we should be listening to that maybe are seeing much more optimism than her?
So I completely agree with what Greta has said, and I think her position is extremely valid and one that we have to continue to hear. Is not the only position that we need to hear. And in every single age cohort, there is a wide diversity of voices. Youth are not monolithic. 30 to 40-year-olds are not monolithic. 60-year-olds are not monolithic. And across the world are hugely diverse voices. We do need to continue to empower youth that represent a wide variety of political stance. That is an extremely important position. I personally believe that my difficulty with Greta's position to be the only one that we consider to be representative of youth is that it does lead to a bit of confrontational perspective in terms of generations, and this is a multi-generational problem. It has taken us 200, 300 years to get to the peak of the climate crisis. Emissions have been building up since the industrial revolution, and it's going to take us another 200 years to actually get it completely fixed. This is a multi-generational problem. So I think there are other many youth that we support that are more of the view that multi-generational cooperation, that are more optimistic, that are finding solutions, that need to be also be empowered. Not forgetting that what Greta has said is 100% true. We don't have the urgency, and we don't yet have all of the solutions. And we have to continue to wake up to that reality, 100%.
Thank you, Sonia. Well, let me bring in Michael at this point. You've also been a keen observer, maybe in a different kind of position to Sif, on the growing role that philanthropy is playing on the international stage in relation to climate. What's your reading of what's happening?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me here today and to join this esteemed panel, and thank you all for coming. I became a climate philanthropy reporter about 4 years ago, and I think, unfortunately, it's a very good time to report on climate philanthropy because a lot is happening and it's not going well. And some of it, there's also many successes, and I try to cover that whole range. I think what I've seen is just there's been an enormous inflow of new money, essentially. And that's exciting. That also means that the power structures and preferences of the people with that money are what is by and large being supported. There's also many people coming in who are taking a different approach, but I think some of the incoming folks, you could see that they could learn from some of the legacy funders who have been through a cycle of whether you look back to the birth of modern climate philanthropy in a sort of technocratic, high-level approach, and have diversified to a more social movement-based. And I imagine that is that poll of the 80-20 is roughly inverse would be the funding proportions, if not worse. The historical example is 1.3%. I hope, I'm not certain that it has reached a slightly higher percentage, but it remains kind of abominably low and certainly not enough to adjust for kind of past funding levels. But, we see climate, as Sonia so well pointed out, it's such a varied and diverse field that philanthropy itself, that you can find an example for any given argument or concern. But by and large, it remains that we are made up of a mostly kind of elite and higher level group that is most interested in technocratic solutions, and we're doing really well on that. There are quibbles, maybe there are issues, but there's a lot of engagement there. There's not always as much engagement elsewhere because that would require turning over the power to people and just giving them money and allowing them to pursue their own choices. We're seeing a greater degree of that, I think. I'm seeing fundraisers are talking about, yes, funders want folks with a community element, with a kind of on-the-ground presence, and that's a great progress. And there are also challenges with that. There are also challenges with turning over more money to intermediaries. These things all have trade-offs. There won't be a perfect pathway through any of it. I don't want to say we just switch from this one thing to this other thing. It's certainly not this bipolar pole as Charles announced. Ultra simplifies it, but we remain on a track that to me is just very different from where we need to be if we're going to have the kind of society-wide transformational role. And I say that as someone who's quite new to this field and is always learning from other experts who have been here a lot longer than I. And I do my best simply to reflect what they're telling me, because I don't see myself really as an expert. I'm frankly kind of shocked to be in this position after 4 years in this field and somehow have been a voice that people find useful, because I just talk to a lot of people. I try to reflect what I hear from lots of people, what I hear that they, for one reason or another, don't want to say publicly, and then share that. And I think there's a lot of room for more honest discussion in philanthropy, and a reflection of both what's going well and what isn't.
Thank you, and that's exactly what we hope to have, is an Alliance tries to have, not just on this issue, is honest discussions that can really ventilate some of the debates and the tensions. You mentioned intermediaries and infrastructure. We'll come on to that in a bit. One man who has gone well beyond technocratic philanthropy is the founder of the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, Chris Hahn, and one of the ways he's done that is the willingness to pursue and fund organisations pursuing legal actions to challenge companies or indeed governments for not fulfilling their obligations. And that's why I'm delighted that we've got Megan and Clay here from a very important NGO, ClientEarth, that does pursue some of those actions, but is also present on international events like COP. So please do introduce yourself and your work and how you see the conversation between philanthropy and the use of law.
Thank you very much, Charles, and it's an absolute delight to be here with all of you. I don't often get to be in the room with this group of people, and already I'm finding the conversation absolutely fascinating. So really looking forward to the rest of the afternoon. In terms of those of you who don't know ClientEarth, we are a group of lawyers, a not-profit, who use the power of the law to protect people and planet. That's sort of our strapline, and that's through a whole range of interventions. And Charles has already mentioned, obviously, litigation is one of those. But we like to talk about how we work through the life cycle of the law. So from thinking about the shape of the laws that we need to protect the planet, right through to thinking about how they can be enforced and how legal action can help us on this journey. Which I guess takes us to COP and the role of ClientEarth at COP. We did have a very small delegation at COP this year, and that was to focus on to some extent on network. So meeting people who are there, who work in this space, making some of those really important in-person connections that actually there isn't always time for in today's kind of online world. And COP obviously now represents an example of a time where actually many people from within the community and the ecosystem are there, and so it can be a really rich opportunity to make those new connections, but also to focus on some of the work we're doing around framework laws. So thinking about the commitments that countries make at COP, their NDCs, and really how that can be translated into national laws. And we think that's a super important theme. It's super important for ClientEarth to help to shape that process and to share our expertise around what those legal frameworks can look like.
Can you share some examples of one or two of those kind of successes in ensuring that those nationally determined contributions become law through your work?
So I think the UK is actually a really good example of that, because here we have the Climate Change Act, which and we were a really pioneering country actually in putting that commitment to climate into law and making it binding. And what you've seen actually is that has made it possible for NGOs, including ClientEarth, to hold governments to account and take them to court. So, for example, alongside partners, we took the UK government to court around its net zero plan and won twice. It's a shame we had to take them a second time. But it's examples like that where actually, if countries put in place those binding commitments, it really is a mechanism through which accountability can be achieved ultimately, and can allow civil society and others to hold their governments to account.
So that's a really important message about philanthropy's ability to fund organisations, NGOs, that can pursue legal processes, legal actions that can hold governments and indeed companies to account to fulfil their responsibilities. Governments might not do that on their own, and the ballot box might be a bit of a blunt tool. So the use of the law being really pertinent, but maybe under-recognised or underfunded by philanthropy. So it's good to have that perspective there. Thank you. I'd like to turn to our second and third topics, which we'll just bring together, which are around the growth of climate philanthropy infrastructure, where we're seeing a more agenda-setting role of umbrella bodies, organisations in the philanthropy space really trying to say this is such an important topic, there needs to be more alignment and engagement and willingness to take a lead. But also I'd say the globalisation of that and with it, how the globalisation of climate philanthropy infrastructure might change some of the conversation about what should be focused on. So maybe if we can just bring Sonia in on this point. How do you see that evolving? How do you fund infrastructure? How important is it for what you're doing?
Thank you. So yes, absolutely. We consider ourselves an institution builder, and the fact that we created recently the role of Chief Ecosystem Development Officer in a way epitomizes our belief that at the philanthropic approach that we need to take in terms of getting money on the ground has to really result in the institutions in the field to become more than the sum of the parts. And by greater collaboration, greater connected tissue, greater alignment in terms of data strategies, because the field is too small. Climate philanthropy is still very small. It has been growing, there has been new entrants, that has taken a huge amount of work to actually get that money flowing, but it's still a fraction of, for example, health. We have grown from 10 years ago when I started in climate philanthropy, the whole climate mitigation field was about $1 billion, $2 billion. Next week, there is going to be the latest data with regards to the size of the climate philanthropy is likely to have grown, but I don't think it will be more than 8 billion. That compared to, say, the health, how much philanthropy spends on health, that is 50 billion. So we are a fifth, even less, of what philanthropy spends on health. Arguably, the scale of the challenge should mean that we should get to about $50 billion. So, over time, the sooner the better. Now, how have we been able to grow from $2 billion to $8 billion? We have had to build new infrastructure, because that infrastructure has allowed both to include platforms that will allow collaboration both at the funder space, where new funders could see themselves. Because for new funders, you have to meet them where they are. What have been their priorities? Yes, philanthropy is very personal. You could try to obviously shape and connect the dots, but it has resulted in some new donors finding themselves into okay, I'm building something, I'm collaborating, I can see my value add in that. So those are platforms for that capturing of funds. But there is also a massive need for collaboration across the field and huge gaps of capabilities, because the climate philanthropy has come from normally the environmental movement, and those are relatively different. And the environmental movement has come primarily strongly into the US and Europe. There are, talking about lawyers, just to give an example, how many environmental lawyers are there in the US? I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands. It could be quite significant. In Europe, we had to actually bring ClientEarth to build it. That is a US model exported into Europe that had to be funded and actually grown. And now we have a few hundreds of lawyers in Europe. How many lawyers are in Japan? 0. So can we actually fund environmental litigation in Japan? No, we can, unless we actually build the infrastructure to do it. Same for you in climate philanthropy in other parts of the world. Yes, we have been building. Most of the money has been in the U.S. Most of the climate philanthropy is American funding. We have to have more European funding. The European community still relies about 75% of what our European NGOs get funded from comes from the US. Even in Europe, we are struggling to get new donors into it. Same for the Global South. I mean, it has grown, but 5% of money is spent in India, 7% in China, 7% across Asia, 9% in Africa and across Latin America. Just to give you an example why infrastructure has mattered. When we have built as a community, for example, the Tara Foundation to cover Southeast Asia, yes, you create intermediaries, there are trade-offs. 5 years ago when we started building Tara Foundation, I mean we not SIF, we with the community, how much money was actually flowing for climate work across the whole of Southeast Asia and East Asia? A number? $500,000. $500,000 for what it is 25% of the emissions of the world, where we have still the coal largest pipeline. $500,000. How much money has flown last year, this year? How much money will we spend as a community in the Southeast Asia region as a result of having been able to get ourselves together and actually build an infrastructure that pools fund and aggregates the field into translating what that spending capacity could be? What is the absorption capacity? What will be the strategies be? That needs collective work. 60 million. Is 60 million enough for the whole Southeast Asia and East Asia sector? I don't think so, but certainly it's much better.
Really interesting, because it really raises some questions about whether Global South philanthropy at a local level is really playing the role it needs to play. There's a lot of discussion about the movement of power shifting from north to south, but you're actually saying power is still concentrated and the resources are still in the north. Michael, thank you for that perspective, Sonia. Michael, what's your perspective on that?
I think one of the things, there's a lot of things that terrify me about the climate and about climate philanthropy. One of the things is that, to get to a $50 billion number, there are a few individuals who could do that if they chose, right? Sure, it would be challenging, but it wouldn't come at any cost to their personal well-being. You're creating an infrastructure, and you have people who are at the very top of the list in terms of taking action, spending money within their class. Among billionaires, you have a Jeff Bezos. He has pledged to spend $10 billion by 2030. He is not on a yearly pace to get there. It was never intended to be a yearly pace, but it is not on pace. And that means that infrastructure is not being created right now. Not just him. It is a large field. There are many billionaires. But consistently, we see people with the Giving Pledge, with other long-term pledges, and they are not spending at the rate that will reach their pledge. They're not even spending at a rate that would mean that they do not become richer every year. So it's hard to take seriously what people are doing when we all read the news. We all see the temperature gauges, the floods, the disasters, and the people who are doing the most among anyone are not spending at a rate that would even diminish their fortunes at ages when they are not, frankly, I'm going to die. We're all going to die. They are also going to die. This should not be controversial to say. They have a limited amount of time on this earth. I'm not sure where that money is going if it's not going to climate, if it's not going to even their other priorities. So that's what drives me crazy, as you can tell.
Well, on that, Michael, scrutiny. That's why you need scrutiny of philanthropy, including climate philanthropy, including elite philanthropy. And you were saying over lunch to me that you're the only reporter who has a specialist dedicated focus on covering what's happening in climate philanthropy, which puts big burden on your shoulders in terms of the scrutiny. And Megan, I'd like to ask you as well, and we'll come back to you on that question of scrutiny. You scrutinise what businesses and governments do. Are they the culprits, or are they potential partners? How do you work to navigate that balance? So we're going to ask that to you, and then Michael, I'd like to come back to you for examples of some recent scrutiny that you subjected Philanthropy to through the prizes in a moment.
Thank you, Charles. That's a fascinating question, and one that we do have to grapple with when we're thinking about our legal strategies, actually, because companies can be both, right? So, you have corporate leaders who are obviously, well, perhaps not obviously, but in many cases are really pushing the envelope, who are taking seriously their commitments. You have the B Corp movement, for example. You do have organisations and individuals within them who are really pushing in the right direction. But at the same time, clearly companies, that's not all companies, and there are many that are greenwashing. There are many that are not living up to the commitments that they've already made on
Do you have some examples of that you can share, where you think there's a gap between the rhetoric and action?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I could kind of, it's a roll call of many of the actions that ClientEarth takes, right? So, for example, we've taken KLM to court in the Netherlands around its net zero commitments. It's examples like that. Similarly, with BP around its net zero commitments. More recently, people might be aware of the Shell case, in which, again, ClientEarth took the directors of Shell to court in the UK, alleging that they'd breached their duties around climate change ultimately. But it's not just ClientEarth. Obviously, Shell have very recently been taken to court in the Netherlands again around their responsibilities on climate change, and it's clearly a really critical role, right? Where corporates are not acting within the law, they should be held to account, and I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm in an organisation that has some of the tools to be able to do that, and it is a growing field. I mean, to the points mentioned already about the field being built, we see already legal action is much more widely understood as a powerful tool to create change, and the number of organisations even that are doing that, even in the UK, has grown significantly since ClientEarth was set up a number of years ago. Perhaps I'll pause there and we can come on some of these things later.
Well, before I come to Michael, just actually to put that same question to Sonia, are business and indeed philanthropy, are they the partners or the culprits from your point of view? I know at COP there's this real debate about whether the Conference of Parties, which is a intergovernmental body, should have a conference of partners, and those partners being business and philanthropy coming together alongside government to address climate change. But at the same time, they might be the culprits that are causing many of the pollution we're trying to address. How do you navigate that? What's your view on that?
Gosh, easy question. So a few things. So obviously, the Conference of the Parties, just to be very technical, it has to maintain, because it's a government piece. There are non-state actors that are really important, and absolutely, from my perspective, the COPs are rightly evolving to be an all-society forum, because all stakeholders have a role to play with regards to addressing the climate crisis. The technicalities of the negotiations, yes, you can leave it to the negotiators, but even that doesn't represent all of the government capabilities that the governments have to make. So I think we have to kind of set the different tracks. So when people sometimes say it's like, the COPs must be much smaller, and I disagree. We need more hands on deck, and we need a lot more perspectives. Are corporate philanthropy culprits or saviors? Both. I mean, I think it depends. It depends. There are a lot of shades of grey on the whole space, and we are pursuing more work, and I think philanthropy has a very strong role to play with regards to continue to pursue setting the standards, creating that clarity of what is good enough and what is not good enough, and then holding accountable all partners in society, holding philanthropy accountable 100%, holding corporates accountable, holding governments accountable, holding the public accountable. Are you voting according to what's good for you versus not good for you, etc. So there is a whole range. So I think that whole range of accountability standards, which is climate action plans, for example, for the corporates, are now becoming law, and only about 5%, actually 1% of climate action plans that have been published by companies are Paris aligned. Clearly insufficient. So where is the huge campaign that pushes that? But the 1% of companies that have climate aligned, truly Paris aligned climate plans, and the 25% of those that have published and they have already said, this is as far as I can go and I need help to get there, I don't think we gain very much by vilifying and putting them in the same buckets. And there are philanthropies and philanthropies, and it's the same for other stakeholders.
And thank you. That's really clear, and clearly good and bad actors in philanthropy too. So on that question of accountability, Megan mentioned about the gap between sometimes the corporate rhetoric and the action, which leads to the legal actions. But we also know that happens in philanthropy as well. And Michael, recently, some of you might have seen some very incisive writing, looking illuminating and providing scrutiny on climate philanthropy awards, some of which we had on the screen before. Can you say a little bit about some of the work you've done in terms of your reporting there on the climate philanthropy prizes and what's been going on? That might be of interest to some of us.
Yeah, sure. To be honest, several months ago, I was looking at the follow-up from Climate Week, and I needed to write a story, and I had been kind of ignoring Earthshot Prize. I thought it got a lot of attention. I try to put my work where there isn't attention, and so I finally took a close look at it, and what I found just kind of shocked me. Like, this is not for me, it's not at a level that remotely measured up to the amount of attention or the number of partners or any of that. I will say first that the thing is that the Earthshot Prize gives a transformative amount of money to the organizations. For the organizations, that is a remarkable sum. It can take them from one level to another. Jumping over the 1 million point is huge. But the rhetoric of being a moonshot, it is not funded like a moonshot program. The number of billionaire partners it has, and the amount of money it gives out. So all of that I wrote up, and I've done some follow-up reporting. I reported on several of the prizes, the Goldman Prize, the Climate Breakthrough, Audacious. I've profiled almost all those prizes over my years in climate philanthropy. All of them give multiple times more per donor than Earthshot. So I felt like, having done that reporting, I went and I talked to folks like Larry Kramer, formerly of Hewlett, Walt Reed, formerly of Packard, got their perspectives. Crystal Haling on LinkedIn, formerly of Libra, said, oh, this is what everyone was saying, but no one would say, right? So I felt like my reporting ultimately backed up, and I'm also talking to several winners, finalists, runners-up of Earthshot as well. So for me, that was a case, and I think I wrote on LinkedIn, like, the emperors of Earthshot, to me, have no clothes. Like, no one was willing to say, hey, this is not serious philanthropy. Like, it could be great. Like, it could be, I trust that there are good people individually working on Earthshot. I trust that a lot of the philanthropies involved are they give out large amounts relative to the kind of...
So just interrupting there, why do you think other foundations like Bloomberg, credible, serious philanthropic organizations are involved in the prize if it really is
I don't think they see any harm, and I think in a way Larry Kramer, said it's certainly not harmful, right? I disagree in some certain respect because it gives the impression that all these people are getting together to do something important, and a lot of philanthropies, probably some in this room, would never even release a press release if they gave out $5 million. Most of the, Bloomberg would not release a press release for a $5 million award. that is not a serious sum for a philanthropy of that size. And so to have an entire event, to have a gala, please show me the amount they spend on press for that prize. Show me the amount they spend on events for that prize. Like, if you know anyone who knows that, please have them come
And
to
just
me.
tell us, what did the palace say in Prince William when you put these questions to him about his
I
prize?
have emailed their shop many times. I have not heard back from them. I would love to talk to them. I believe that the individual people involved in this they're trying to do their best in a very broken system. I am trying to shine a light on the fact that the system is broken. Like, to me, it's just shocking that no one, to be the first one after 3 years of Earthshot Prize to write something like this just shocks me. Like, I don't understand how, I think the whole industry has an enormous problem of honesty and frankness. And I think all of you in this room, particularly those of you who are funders, have the superpower of being honest. Like, climate philanthropy, if you haven't noticed, is growing. If you are honest, you will probably be able to find another job. But you will also be able to tell everybody that, hey, this is not working. Like, this is not at a level we need. This is not serious. This is a power everybody has. Like, for me, the shock is that I'm the one who suddenly wrote this. It just didn't make sense to me that no one else had said these things.
Thank you. Thanks for those frank comments. Do either of you want to respond before we go to people, the audience here, for their questions? Sonia, do you have anything to say? Or are you going to retain a diplomatic silence?
And I will note that I really appreciate that there are pathways at all levels of this. I mean, I get heated about, say, an Earthshot because it represents the worst of this. I wrote one of the most scathing pieces I'd ever written. I do not like to write op-eds. I prefer to do reporting. I prefer to find the nuance and report deeply into the nuance and ask people about the critiques. And that's my preferred manner of reporting. And I recognize that everybody chooses a pathway in order to make change in a much larger system that won't change overnight. So it's hard, in a few comments to kind of share that range, but I wouldn't put any given person on the spot except maybe the donors at the top who are really dictating.
Thank you. Sonia.
So I think I'm with Larry. I'm not going to comment specifically on any one particular initiative because I think the bigger problem is that we don't have enough resources for all that we want. But I know is your point. But if philanthropists can find individual donors and everyone can find the way in which they can contribute and they play to their strengths, then we will become more than the sum of our parts. There is not enough people in the philanthropic community that care and are prioritizing climate in their philanthropy. So at least the Royal Foundation has decided to prioritize climate philanthropy, and that's how they are doing it. Could they do more? We could vote that question, and there are people putting that question. Are there many other people that can do more? Yes, we should be asking that question. We should also be asking, how are we going to be collaborating more effectively so our money joins up to punching above our weight? Because we're relatively small compared to what we have. And I think this goes to your earlier question about Global South and cultivating donors in other countries. Philanthropy in other geographies look different. And we cannot expect to have an American-style philanthropy or a European-style philanthropy in India or Japan or Indonesia. It's going to look different. And I think we have to nurture and cultivate and meet them where they are. There is incredibly generous people everywhere in the world. There are lots of people concerned about the climate crisis. What they are finding difficult is how to start. Where is the infrastructure to get them there? And I do think that the crisis is so big that all tools are valuable. All voices and initiatives are important. They do add up. They are not in itself all that we need. And I'd rather people doing stuff than not doing stuff.
Thank you. Well, at this point, it would be great to hear your views, thoughts, questions. Please feel free to raise your hands, introduce yourselves. I'll try and take a few questions or thoughts at a time. If there's anything coming through the live stream in the chat, I'm very welcome to do that. In case we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Take you first. Hi.
Hi, Kathy from Global Canopy. My question is about seeing sort of climate philanthropy as a single issue, and how measuring the funds for climate. So it's about seeing climate philanthropy as a sort of single theme, and do we need to be thinking about it more in connection with poverty alleviation, health, the environment, and maybe sometimes not even mentioning climate? For example, local communities, if they're concerned about air pollution and health, that's also going to be tackling the climate.
It's that at intersections of climate with other causes, like health, as you mentioned, with Wellcome Trust and others. Daniel, should we take you, and then we'll go to, I'll take Daniel and then the gentleman next to him at the back.
Hi, Daniel Roster from World Economic Forum. For many of us, it seems like climate solutions fall into one of two categories: either mitigating greenhouse gas emissions on one hand, or providing solutions around adaptation and resilience on the other hand. And the latter is hugely underfunded. So I wanted to ask the panel, why is that? Why is it that adaptation and resilience is so underfunded compared to mitigation? And also, what are some top-class examples that you might point to in that topic?
Thank you, that's great.
Yeah, thank you. Tony Ripley, I used to be the climate litigation lead for the UK government. For the first time, you successfully sued them, and well done, you. The gift is to lose. I now work for an independent diplomat that supports the Marshall Islands and the High Ambition Coalition in climate negotiations, and that's the original hack, not the hack for nature and people that won the Earthshot Prize. You would have seen at COP that at one point the small island states and least developed countries walked out because they weren't being listened to, and a lot of what they were arguing for in the new climate finance goal was, as was just said, money for adaptation and resilience, money going to SIDS and LDCs rather than being one big pot. We're used to calling out government, but you mentioned, a lot of philanthropy money is being spent on technology and not enough, and in the wrong places. So who should be calling out, philanthropists and billionaires and the organisations that disperse their money to make sure it's going to the right places? Thanks.
Thank you. We'll just take one more from you over there. Just wait for the microphone to come, and then we'll go back to the panel. You can take any of them.
Thank you. I'm Zoe from Climate Outreach, and we work on issues around engaging people, mainly in the UK, on climate. And I think to your point about engaging people at intersections is exactly what we try and do with communities. And I think that is really crucial. And my question is about the speed of funding to smaller community groups, particularly in the UK. Like, there is more funding going to the global south now, rightly as it should be, but there's also, and I used to work in international development, so I think that is very important, but I think there is a real issue about, particularly now with the new Labour government, about how we take advantage of the moment that we're in now to get them, to support communities to really be engaging with climate on all different levels, so be it health, transport, food. There's lots that we can do, but they don't have the funding to do it. And a lot of the big foundations are kind of re-strategizing and pausing their funding, is our experience. And it makes it very challenging for the kind of mid-sized, non-startup organisations that are working on those areas.
Thank you. Let's go across. Go from you first, Megan. Just pass the mic.
Thank you. Oh, cracking questions. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to start at the beginning with a question about, should we talk about, is the intersectionality, should we break climate down, should it be about climate, should it be about health? I think this is a really fascinating question, and I don't have an answer, spoiler, but I wonder whether this reflection of health, we've heard that it gets so much more funding than climate, and I wonder if that speaks to part of the problem that we have with a movement about appealing to people across the board. And you can imagine that everyone is touched by illnesses, for example, that have affected people that are close to them. They very often have a real personal connection with some of those issues on health. Whereas I think that's something that, when we talk about climate in the wider sense, it often feels like something that's, even though it really isn't, that's down the line, that's happening perhaps far away, and that people therefore struggle to bring into their lives every day. So I think that's an excellent question from my perspective. At ClientEarth, it's something that we're thinking about a lot. So our clean air work very much focused on health and health outcomes for people, and we have I think really found that that is a way in which we can connect with people and with communities really successfully, perhaps in a way that when we're talking more broadly about climate, that's something that is more challenging. So I'd be really interested to hear what other people think about that as well. I'll maybe pause there and hand it on and come back to some of the other questions later. But I think that's a really fascinating question about, in general, how we communicate about climate, how we make sure we're appealing and engaging people across the board.
Thank you, Michael.
On intersectionality, I'll say, before I worked at IP, I worked for grant makers concerned with immigrants and refugees, and we were always making the case that in the US you can't care about education unless you care about the immigrants in your schools, you can't care about health unless you care about the undocumented people seeking care in your emergency rooms. I think this is true for virtually any issue, and climate too is both a lens and its own issue. There will be a certain amount of funding that's very specific for very specific mitigation or adaptation, and there'll also be a lens that I hope basically all funders are doing, that I become the climate reporter just on that kind of mitigation focused area, and then that mitigation is also spread through all these other areas, and that's also what all my colleagues cover, because we're not getting out of this alive without everybody funding it in a certain way. Maybe that's a bit dramatic, but you get my point. My memory is terrible, and I'm not sure about all the other questions, so I'm going to hope that others took notes, and I'll follow on with this.
Maybe you can help us.
Yes.
But I'll share a couple of thoughts first on the stuff that I remember. Completely agree with you on intersectionality. There is a need for core focus, and then there is obviously a need not to be blind about the connectivities. And that connectivity is both to ensure that the strategy is resilient, that we're also finding common ground, and we find co-travelers that we can see eye to eye in issues, and we can join forces to ensure that we're stronger when we're pushing a certain direction. But there is also that goes for cultivating new donors or finding new partners, and in many other spaces. But there is a real value of expertise and focus. And people tend to say it's like we need to break silos. I agree, but the silos are created so you can actually go deep. And this is an extremely technical issue too, that we need to be able to get our head around, and you get that through expertise. So it goes both ways. I just think that we need to balance things out. I find myself in a lot of conversations now on all sorts of intersectionality, from health to nature to the debt crisis to conflict to child marriage. And I think, climate does affect many of them because it's the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced. So, yes, absolutely. Can I answer the question about adaptation and resilience? And I don't remember who asked the question. Yes. So why hasn't more money been given to adaptation and resilience? The numbers I have been using are the core climate mitigation funders, if you wish. Okay, I think most of the climate adaptation money has actually been coming more from governments. There has been a lot of resources going into infrastructure. A lot of bilateral cooperation has been, a lot of the UK bilateral cooperation, for example, has focused traditionally on resilient and adaptation infrastructure. I think philanthropy can do, should do more, and there should be more money going to adaptation, no question. I mean, at the COP in COP28, as we know, the adaptation fund was not sufficiently funded, and we continue to struggle with that for a couple of reasons. And this is my personal opinion. One is that a lot of first, a bit of a moral jeopardy. We don't have a handle on the climate crisis at all. Emissions continue to grow. With emissions continue to grow, temperature continues to grow. So it is a moving target. We have been, the temperature curve projections by the end of the century, 5-10 years ago, took us to 5-6 degrees. Now we're in the range of 2.5-3 degrees. Clearly not good enough, but we are still growing in emissions, 2% last year. So until we get to zero, there is no stabilization possible. And the longer it takes us to get to zero, the higher the adaptation challenge is going to be, right? So it's a bit like in a world where we have very little resources, very little time, very little infrastructure. Where do we prioritize in a very time-bound problem our resources? In getting to zero as soon as possible, or in adapting in that moving target? Is a call, and people make different choices, okay? And they're all fine. Now, having said that, I also think that there has been a little bit of, I'm being inspired by you. So, lack of creativity in the core adaptation community and the resilience community. It has been too much focus on local infrastructure, flood defenses, drought-resistant seeds, planting a couple of trees, or 1 million, or whatever, in areas too. It's not systemic. We cannot, philanthropy, there is no way where we can fund all of the resilience and all adaptation infrastructure that the world needs. It's absolutely, utterly impossible. So there has not been enough advocacy, there hasn't been enough systemic thinking with regards to what does an adaptation plan look like. Can we also be honest that there will be parts of the population that will have to move? They will become uninhabitable because we have already warmed up 1.4 degrees. Because we will warm up even more. So are we prepared as a community to actually have a conversation, to have, meet people on the eye and say, I am very sorry, but your village has no future. And we have not looked anyone in the eye with that message because we don't have the gut for it. So, that is what it's going to take for us to really address resilience at the heart of the issue. And yes, I also believe that we are going to have to the point of intersectionality, where there is one intersectionality that we really need to grab with both hands and actually just say, this is going to be really, really difficult. It's going to be really hard. It's going to get much worse. In our lifetime, we will not see it any better. It's going to get worse before it gets better. People are going to suffer. But we need to toughen up. And the resilience has to go alongside, because if we lose the public will to actually get to zero, then no matter how much money we put in resilience, we will never be done.
Thank you for those sobering thoughts, but thank you for your frankness. Alliance, actually, its next issue in March we'll have a special feature on refugees, and we'll be looking at the question of climate refugees, which really touches on your point. What about emissions in the global south? There's a lot of talk about climate finance for climate justice, for resilience, going from the north to the south. But if you talk to businesses in the south, including businesses connected to philanthropy, they talk about sometimes growing energy needs, growing populations, and therefore no intention to cut emissions. This is something that the the chair of the African Philanthropy Forum in Nigeria was saying to me that absolutely it's not on the table at the moment. They've got a growing population, need to feed them, and therefore emissions in Nigeria will go up, not down. Is that justifiable, given that they ultimately were not responsible for a lot of the mess that's been caused by emissions in the global north? How does one tackle that question? Do either of you want to respond to that, or should we get some more reaction from everyone here? Michael, you go ahead, and then please we'll come to you in a moment for another round of questions.
I think it would be rich for me as a white guy born in London, raised in the America, sitting here and saying that we should focus overly on global south emissions as a starting point. It's like you look at the historical graphs of emissions, it's just you can see who did the damage, right? I do think focusing on your own is a good starting point. I think also being part of helping make that transition is also part of making up for the past, right? I think American philanthropy, European philanthropy, their governments, they have a role to play in making sure that everybody invests in clean energy. In most places, in most cases, right, as all of you probably know much better than solar, wind are more affordable options than polluting ones. Obviously, there are, rich coal deposits, etc., that people want to tap. Part of that historical reparations is making sure that countries don't have to, that they can jump, if you will, from no technology to cell phones, or from whatever they're currently using for energy straight to wind and solar. And that's part of a bigger responsibility that those who benefited most from the Industrial Revolution have, in my view. And then quickly, if I may, on adaptation, I think the numbers on climate foundation funding went from like 500,000 just foundation funding to 3 billion, and overall, now it's up to 8 billion. I think on adaptation, we just got a report that said it was about 600 million last year and expected to be 650 to 700 this year. I think when I was a young, wet behind the ears climate reporter, I talked to Larry Kramer, and he's like, "Hey, look, we didn't have very much money. We need to make a strong bet. We were going for mitigation. We didn't want to give the sense that there was a license to pollute." And you talk to people who have worked in resilience as long as Larry Kramer worked in climate philanthropy, or if not longer, and they say that was never an either or that was necessary, right? We could always do both. And so there are differing opinions on this. I can respect kind of where both come from, but I do think adaptation brings in a different group of people that we need involved, and should have been involved. So.
Wow. Well, talking of Larry Kramer and the Hewlett Foundation, which is one of the most, alongside SIF and others, significant grant maker on climate. But Larry Kramer is on the record when we interviewed him at Alliance as saying that Hewlett Foundation invest in fossil fuels because they're generating return on their investment. But then the purpose of their grant making was to do those companies the fossil fuel companies out of business. So handling those contradictory elements and those tensions, which does of course raise the question of how and to what extent endowments are aligned with missions. And also the other theme being reparations, including climate reparations. So those are two themes around philanthropy practice that we might talk about either during this panel or later in our workshop. But I would like to just open the floor again for further questions. We've got
Can I
time
comment
for...
on your Nigeria thing?
Yes, Sonia, go ahead, and please raise your hands. Is there anyone that would like to raise some questions based on the provocations you've been hearing? Okay, so I'll take you, and then we'll come back for you to respond on Nigeria or even Gulf.
Yes, thanks.
Go ahead.
I'm Carolyn Gardner from Philae, and I wanted to pick up on your question, actually, Charles. So we, with some of our partners, host a series of commitments for foundations to integrate climate within all aspects of their work, and we're seeing slower progress on the endowments and assets pillar, which is one of the pillars. And so I wanted to hear from the panel to what extent they see kind of decarbonisation or other approaches to integrating climate into the endowment investment approach of the foundation as a potential distraction in a way that takes away potentially from some of that capital that's available to tackling climate change, or if on the other hand it's an opportunity. I think in Canada we've seen like Ivy Foundation and Trottier Foundation making more of their capital available and spending down parts or entirely their capital. So is it an opportunity for climate or a distraction or a bit of both?
Thank you, great question. And gentleman here, and then we'll come back for, I think we'll be probably closing comments.
Hi, I'm Tom from Vaughan and Flora. So I had a question around, so basically I have a pipeline of what looks like older white men in my philanthropy space, and I'd quite like to get your opinion on what we can do as a diversify the pipelines that are out there and also diversify where the money is coming from. I think you look at Melinda Gates and people like that who are thinking differently about their philanthropy. Has the old white male philanthropy failed climate and more general philanthropy as a whole?
Thank you. And just any more final comment from the floor from anyone here? So we've got two more actually. We'll take you two.
Hi, my name's Layla. I'm from IIED, and we also host IPCC. One of the questions, well, firstly to respond to the point around philanthropists seem to be in an eternal restructuring cycle. I would agree with that. But we also kind of do lead around the adaptation work, and part of the evidence that was produced for the complement came from IIED and from the IPCC. So my question was really just around how philanthropists are working with companies to kind of build more momentum towards adaptation and resilience. So for example, insurance companies, getting them to mobilise to make sure that communities have better insurance to enable them to build their resilience. So the kind of dynamic between philanthropists and companies, I was quite interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, my name's Nisha, I'm from Global Green Grants Fund UK, and I just wanted to really say that central to tackling climate change is this concept of a just transition, and it's really important for us to remember our vantage point from here in the global north. It's very difficult for us to say, when we are not the ones who face the crises that vulnerable frontline communities are facing, we can't just say, oh, you have to toughen up, you will have to leave, you will have to move. Adaptation is just as important as mitigation, because these people are vulnerable now, and so we cannot just focus all of our efforts on changing what's happening around policymakers and decision makers when they are not the ones who are facing this kind of challenges. And so there are also optics about us sitting in this room and talking about where our money goes and what's more important. And let's also remember that we are not the ones who are suffering as much as others, and that we need to be dedicating resources to vulnerable communities, which are, usually, but actually not solely now, in the global south, and understanding that we also need to have sympathies when we discuss the challenges that global south philanthropy and global south governments say from their vantage points of, how do we sustainably develop ourselves? How do we take care of our people in these crises? So just a call for this to be more of a wider reflection when we decide what steps we want to take next for climate philanthropy and what challenges we want to raise up and critiques we want to mention.
Thank you very much. Very well put. So 4 perspectives there. I'll just try and summarise them. 2 around diversity, actually, and the elitism of philanthropy. 1 about philanthropy and companies and businesses. And there was one excellent point from Carolyn Gardner at Philia just about endowments. Is this focus on divesting from fossil fuels a distraction from the grant making on climate, or is it actually at the core of it? So we're going to turn to our panel for their reflections on that. First, we'll go to Sonia first.
Okay, quickly. So we dedicate more than we are a children's foundation, so 50% of our funding is on climate mitigation, with a very strong lens on climate resilience to it. The other 50% is children's health and development with a very strong lens on poverty alleviation and alleviating suffering. So there is very much present on every single day in how we approach our work. So it is always with 100% a lens of being with the most vulnerable and give them voice that we do everything that we fund. With that perspective, we have taken a very strong lens on localization. We have boots on the ground. We have offices in Delhi, in Nairobi, in Addis, and in Beijing. And we have been tracking for a decade how much money we are putting to local organizations. And we make a very big point at the executive team to actually continue to grow that. It is the only way in which you get away from the white European syndrome. My board is very white. Chris Hahn is a British guy. Actually, first migrant from Jamaican descent, but anyway, there is lots to it. So I completely agree that we don't resolve the climate crisis without more voices, without being more local, and without a lot more of that recognition. And absolutely, always with those most vulnerable at the heart of it. That goes to your question earlier about is the Global South right to push back and say, well, we have to grow. The only way to grow that we know of and we have seen is by burning more fossil fuels. So my strategy is to create prosperity for my people, is to first pollute and then clean, which is what you have done. So, unless you help me identify and create another pathway, that is the only one that seems available. And that's a very reasonable place to be. So it is incumbent upon all of us, the community, other countries, and why there has been such a big issue in COP29 about finance is because it's a question of finance, it's a question of technical assistance on policies, it's a question of discovering on technological cooperation. We need to be funding, as a community, clean growth strategies that are at a country level. What is the new vision for growth that, for example, delivers 7-8% of growth in India, 10% of growth in Vietnam, because that is what they are used to, and anything lower than that will be seen as compromising. So I think it is possible, it is being done. The V20 has 20 prosperity plans out there, many of the NDCs are doing it. We can do more, but there is a lot more resources that need to be mobilized to do that. To the question on the endowments, I don't think it's a distraction. All tools are important. We need to deploy all the tools at our disposal, every single one of them. We have $6 billion in the endowment. We do use some of that for impact philanthropy. But actually, what I like the most about how we manage our endowment is that we demand every company that we hold in our endowment to produce a climate transition plan that is Paris aligned. And we put a lot of pressure in making sure that that's the case. So, that already means that our endowment is half of the MSCI benchmark. And I don't think it gives me a lot of insight as to what corporates are actually facing. Many of these corporates, they actually want to do the right thing. Some are just lazy, they don't want to, but they need ClientEarth to push them. But there are others that say, there is a real first mover disadvantage. There is a real green premium that has been calculated. And that is creating sectoral alliances that we can also support.
And thank you. And just before I pass the floor, because I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, I just want to ask you what to look out for 2025, just in a few words, what you're going to be focused on.
More of what we have been discussing. So I think we need more money, we need more cooperation, we need more collaboration, we need everything that you put on that first question. I think is absolutely right. We need more talk on how we are going to be facing, because the reality is that even though we have grown, we have been doing great things, and there is a lot to celebrate. We didn't get to your question about what have philanthropy done. That has been tremendous, and there is so much that we can say that we have been achieving. We are still not there. Emissions are still growing. So the next 5 years are really important to get to that level of scale urgency at a point where populism is on the rise, where the far right is really in our heels, and where the public are scared. And we need to help through the crisis in order for us to be able to deliver the transformation that it will make things worse otherwise.
Thank you. Pass to Michael, just closing comments or Megan, and then Michael.
Thank you. A couple of things. Very much to agree with Sonia in relation to the assets and endowments point. I think we need all the tools, and I think assets and endowments can be really important. If you are pushing your asset managers to be taking the actions that we want to see on the financial system, that can have direct consequences on companies. So we talk a lot about, or think a lot at ClientEarth about denying debt. So there are constantly fossil fuel companies, for example, are constantly being refinanced through the bond market, and that's something that's ongoing. And if we can encourage investors to stop refinancing those companies, that sends a really clear message about what's acceptable and what's not. So I very much agree with that. In terms of looking forward to 2025, there is so much to do, obviously. Sonia mentioned earlier transition planning. I think that's going to be a really big focus for us, for the whole community. And if we focus on the UK for a moment, the Labour government has committed to putting in place mandatory transition plans, which feels like a huge opportunity to really lead the way and to set out how we can hold corporates accountable. And really mandate that they help with the transition, that companies do this. And I think there's a link back to the Nigeria question there, because I absolutely agree we have to be so conscious of our role here sitting in London, but we also have to be really conscious of the role of multinational corporations that are headquartered in the UK, in other higher income countries that are exporting the old model, the old energy model to these countries and making a profit from it. So I think there's lots to think about there in terms of corporate responsibility in the transition. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Last word for you, Michael.
On endowments, I'll say, I personally believe that foundations should have to put all their money into impact. I think that would make sense. I think that no foundation has to have a financial team specialist to do their investments. They can just hand it all to a firm or 5 firms and do that. Foundations could be a way, their capital could build that system into a more robust system than it is today if they acted. On the old white male question, I've heard it expressed, and I think quite beautifully, by the former head of Donors of Color Network. It's like, and others, many others, it's like an ecosystem, right? Everyone involved in environmental issues knows that a monoculture is not a strong culture. And, as long as we look like that, that's a problem, right? And we've seen progress. There's a lot to go. And donor-wise, it's probably not going to change. So that's where I think pressure and honesty come through. To grant making while doing strategy, I think foundations should take a lead from, you could say corporations, and more to the point, their own grantees. They're not stopping their work while doing a strategic plan. They're doing both. So foundations, you too can make it happen, I trust. And then, it's just some of these rules are just, they're a little bit laughable to me. Yeah. Final thoughts for 2024. I just hope for more honesty, right? Like, we had this whole frame around, for 2025, excuse me, for next year. We had this whole frame around the decisive decade. Maybe we'll actually treat the next 5 years like a decisive half decade. And I think that starts with, saying what we believe, celebrating what we're doing well and the nuance, and also saying when we disagree with something and doing it in a respectful but firm way. And that maybe could help us grow.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Sonia. On that note, that's exactly the kind of conversation we're trying to foster without a strategic review in between. I'm not announcing that there'll be no more publications of Alliance for 2025. We'll keep going. And I know you all will too, because the issues need our attention and resources. So thank you. That was the year in climate philanthropy in 75 minutes, as best as we could. I know we didn't cover everything. Thanks to everyone who's joined via the live stream. You'll receive a video of the event next week and a write-up together with details on how, if you don't already, you can subscribe to Alliance, which we aspire to be a place for what's happening in philanthropy everywhere. For those of you here in London with us, it's time for tea. Please rejoin us in about 15 minutes, 3:45, for a special Alliance workshop where we'll be applying a climate lens to our 4 special features of the year. So thank you very much, and that concludes this part of our panel today. Thank you. Thank you. That's great. It was, safe travels.
Thank you very much.
Have a good trip. Great, thank you so much. Really enjoyed that. It seemed like it was very lively.